Thank you, Claire. It seems strange to actually hear that title because until 2 months ago I was principal in Sculborough Coolcots in Wexford. And listening to Rosaleen there, and she was surprised at some of her findings. Those of us that are in school might not be as surprised. But I say in the beginning that there is something inherently wrong when a child in a primary school is clinically depressed or is presenting with serious emotional or behavioural difficulties. To me, this should not be the norm, and yet we are now accepting this as normal. In an IPPN survey, 4 times as many primary school principals stated that emotional well-being difficulties are the greatest child welfare challenge in 2015 compared to 2009. Studies also show that Ireland is now the 4th, or has the 4th highest suicide rate in the world. Over 500 people are taking their lives each year. My own school, where I was for the last 32 years, and I've been teaching 38 years and 32 years in that school. So we're a relatively new school. And I was looking at the figures earlier, and 10 of our past pupils have met tragic deaths. In fact, when I was stopping to think about it, that's now gone to 11. And we're no different than other schools, because the pressures, the reality now that the pupils we are dealing with are experiencing far greater pressures, and Rosaleen highlighted some of those, than when we were in school. I'm sure there was always some element of bullying when we were in school, but at least when we went home, you were safe. You were safe at the weekends, you were safe during the holidays. Now with social media, it is 24/7. Do you know, last year the single toughest case of bullying that I dealt with in school was with some 5th class girls, about 7 of them. And the method of bullying was actually an app that many of you use. It was called Viber. It could just as easily be in WhatsApp or any of the others. And when I called the parents in, first of all, they were shocked that their own girls would take part in it. But they were also shocked that Viber could be used in such a way. Now, it raises the whole question of parental supervision, and that's another debate to do with when their child is on the internet. Now, you might ask, were these 7 girls bullies? Actually, out of the 7 of them, 5 of them had never come to my attention before, and they were almost finished in primary school for the wrong reason. But what happened is they get caught up in the herd mentality. And unfortunately, and particularly with young girls, they start experiencing, and I firmly believe that they never actually lose it at second level and further on. They get caught up in what others think of them and their appearance. And that is starting younger and younger now in primary school. Whereas Clive will probably say at second level, you used to only see that. We used to see that as much in primary level. And when you couple that with the need for those children to be with the in-group, to belong, the devastation when they're excluded over something simple, or as happened on Viber, where there were spiteful comments about their appearance and their families, which is a very common one, and then the accusation that somebody was gay. And for those young people, that consumes their lives. Whatever about even learning, health and happiness is a problem. But as Rosaleen pointed out, that's only one of the pressures that they're actually feeling in primary schools now. And the other aspect, which was another study, the Growing Up in Ireland project, which many of you are familiar with, has found that twice as many families, 25%, were having difficulties making ends meet when their child was 5 years of age than in the previous 9 months. And what was happening with that? The anxiety that that was creating at home was transferring into school. And so in school we were then seeing emotional or irrational outbursts or just poor performance. And we weren't 100% sure what was the cause of it. Since 1998, we now have a huge number of children with special educational needs in our mainstream schools, and that is to be very welcomed. It is great progress. But studies also show that children with special educational needs, a greater proportion of those have mental problems as well. And for many of us dealing with them in school, it's very often very difficult to see whether their underlying condition is causing their problems or whether it's a more fundamental mental health. And that's a difficulty. Another factor in schools at the moment, which is only recent, but it's in many workplaces, schools are not alone in this, is that the staff that are trying to deal with these emotional problems with the children are themselves going through emotional and economic problems. And whereas in the past, if you were a teacher, the chances are you would never be rich, but you'd never be in the poorhouse. But recent times have changed all that, and the amount of pressures that are on, particularly young teachers nowadays. And then as a teacher, when you're facing this yourself and trying to come to terms with your own emotions and the problems you have, and you're trying to deal with the emotions and the well-being of the children in front of you, some of whom you have had to feed that morning because they're coming to school hungry, or whatever other list of problems there might be. And in the primary sector, there's 3,300 schools, and many of you here today are from different types of schools. From the 1 or 2 teacher, in my own school we had over 70 staff. But all of the schools have one thing in common. All the schools are of the community, so you can never take the school from the community, and likewise you can never take the community from the school, nor should you. But the community brings its own pressures as well, depending on where the school is. And if we're to address the problem, a part of the focus today is the emotional well-being of everybody, including the community as well. Because if you just isolate children alone, you're leaving out a complete sector. The other thing that all the schools would have in common, all the primary schools, that we want to provide a warm, safe learning environment where quality teaching and learning takes place, where children can interact socially with other children, irrespective of their backgrounds or their colour. And the little clip that Niall showed was very telling there about respect and self-esteem. And it's very much at the heart of what today is about. Because we've made huge progress in our school buildings. There are actually very few poor school buildings anymore. But a school is more than just a building. And any of the inspectors or psychologists who visit our schools here today would tell you the minute they walk in the door of a school, they can tell you the atmosphere and the ethos in that school. And it's nothing to do with the building, even though the building, how it is presented, tells its own story, tells a lot. But it's rather how they will be greeted, and whether the staff and the parents and the pupils interact with respect for each other. That would have been always the underlying ethos in our own school. And we would have frequently revisited the old adage that children will not always remember what we taught them, but they will always remember how we treated them. And to me today, our role is to help the school community to create that positive atmosphere. The realization, we have to understand this, that a young person's ability to recognize and express their emotions is fundamental to his or her capacity to learn. Many of the schools here today will follow the NEPS continuum, and Margaret will probably talk about it later. And it was touched on briefly about the work of NEPS. A lot of us would have had problems with NEPS over the years. Not so much that they weren't doing their job, it's just we felt they were tied into the wrong job, because if you were lucky, you got 2 assessments a year in most schools. And the reason you got your 2 assessments is so that you could access resources. So we had to get NEPS to label the child to get the resources. Now, thankfully, there is a new model being piloted at the moment where they're looking at resource allocation, a different model. And what I hope that model will be, and I'd have to agree with it, I hope to put extra resources in, that's a separate issue. But the targeting resources, but what I hope will happen is that it will actually free up NEPS to do what I feel they should be doing, and I know Margaret will probably touch on this later. And what I feel they should be doing, and we were very lucky, is that rather than doing the assessments, they're actually coming in and working on the Friends for Life programme. Any of you would have had that in your schools. We're very, very lucky that way. And that's what I think should be happening with NEPS, is that they're actually coming in and supporting schools in that way and supporting the teachers to deal with these issues, rather than just coming in doing their assessments. It wasn't their fault, that's the way the system was set up, and then unfortunately they never gave us enough of them in the first place. So they had too much of a workload. Those of us in education know the value of early intervention. So if it was for academic reasons, we might have reading recovery or maths recovery or literacy lift-off. So we can give a boost to someone that might be struggling. But I'm sure, like many here today, I would have put in referrals to our local health office, a psychiatric referral, and then you get back word that there's an 18-month to 2-year waiting list before they're even seen. And then the frustration of having to send in another referral when a child has self-harmed. And this time you're sending it in not just to the psychiatrist, but to the social workers to see would they take some action. That is reality on the ground in some cases. At my own school, we were lucky because we were a DESH school. And a DESH school, for those of you might know, was the old disadvantaged schools in the mid-90s or the early 90s. And it's ironic how things have changed, because when you had to meet certain criteria to become a DESH school, but in the early 90s, a lot of schools wouldn't apply for it because they thought it would be a stigma on their school. Now every school in Ireland wants to become a DESH school. So it's amazing how things have changed. And I say we were luckier because we got extra staffing, and that was great. We got extra support from our NEPS psychologist, and that was great because we got a better service. And we got those Friends for Life, and we got Zippy's Friends, and we got the Secret Agent Society, which is a great programme for children with special needs, absolutely brilliant. We had the peer mentoring, so we got all of that. But the greatest asset that we got, and it probably is a lesson for how we're going to proceed after this, the greatest asset we got as a DESH school was not the extra resources, although everybody loves the extra teachers, but every single member of staff was focused on the same aims. And at the time, those of you that are DESH schools here, your literacy, your numeracy, your school attendance, and parental involvement. So everybody in the school had those same aims. But the other thing it did was everyone in the school and the community, we were focused on a positive school climate and culture. And as we discovered, that was fundamental to the staff and the student well-being. And it centred around mutual respect. The good thing about that is the positive atmosphere improved our results. So to me, this was a win-win situation. So not only did it help life skills for the pupils and manage their own emotions, but it also made it a nice place to work. And let's face it, that's what most of us like to have as well. There are certain times in a child's life that can be traumatic. The transition from preschool to primary school, although ironically enough that can be more traumatic for the parents than for the children. And yet we're geared for that. We put a lot of work into bringing the children in before the start, and we have a good transition program. The second one then is when they transfer to second level. And they go from the nurturing environment that I would say that we have in primary school to the exam-driven, points-driven of second level. And I remember, a lot of you might have known Tom Collins, who was president of Maynooth for a period of time. But Tom addressed this once anyway, and I still remember how he described the different sectors and the people that were teaching in them. And he said, primary teachers, they love their children. The secondary teachers, they love their subjects. And he paused. And he said, the third level teachers, they love themselves. And I tell it because, to a certain extent, the children experience the nurturing environment that is in the primary school, and it is still there, thanks be to God, to the system where, and this is understandable, where they're into a points-driven system. So I'm just going to finish up. Today is about focusing on everybody's well-being. But I just say it costs nothing to provide a positive school culture for our pupils and our staff. And yet the benefits are enormous. And just one of the slides that Niall had up there earlier, I recently heard a talk by Shane Martin. And this phrase stuck with me because he said, it's never too late to be healthy and happy. It is called hope. I'm a positive person and I'm full of hope for the future, because I think we are in a good space, but there is a lot of work needed. And I think if we get back to the focus of measuring what we value, I think we'll be even in a better space. So, Gormila Margaret, thank you very much.
Thanks, Pat.